A few days later, Cuba Gooding Jr. appeared on The Tonight Show. It was an opportunity for him to talk about the effects of chemotherapy. "I'm losing a lot of hair. For people who don't know me or who only watch me on TV, it's not easy to notice, but I know every morning when I wake up, I find myself surrounded by a pile of hair," he lamented. But even while sick, Cuba Gooding Jr. still looks very healthy. A few days earlier, he had taken the opportunity during a trip to answer questions from fans. "This is my real hair," Cuba Gooding Jr. declared in the comments section of one of his beautiful photos. "I've lost a lot of hair since starting chemotherapy." To slow down the loss of his brown hair, Cuba Gooding Jr. found a solution. "I wear a cold cap during each treatment. Very painful, but supposedly minimizes hair loss." After many weeks of hiding his condition, Cuba Gooding Jr. now feels relieved. "Things aren't as bad as before. I'm living much more peacefully with this disease," he explained. "I've completely accepted it, so I'm having a much more honest approach." Cuba Mark Gooding Jr. was born on January 2, 1968, in the Bronx, New York, into a family already immersed in the entertainment industry. His father, Cuba Gooding Sr., was the lead singer of the soul group The Main Ingredient, best known for their hit song, "Everybody Plays the Fool." His mother, Shirley Sullivan, managed the household and her husband's career while raising 4 children. Growing up as the son of a successful musician meant Cuba Jr. experienced both the glamour and instability of show business from childhood. The Gooding household during Cuba's early years was characterized by the feast or famine cycle typical of the music industry. When his father's group was riding high on chart success, the family enjoyed relative prosperity. But the music business is notoriously unstable, and lean periods between hits created financial stress and family tension. Young Cuba witnessed the price of pursuing artistic dreams: the late nights, the travel, the attention and adulation balanced against uncertainty and pressure. When Cuba was 6 years old, his father moved the family to Los Angeles, pursuing music opportunities on the West Coast. This relocation placed Cuba in the heart of the entertainment industry, but it also coincided with the beginning of serious family difficulties. Cuba Sr.'s success with The Main Ingredient was waning. Financial pressures mounted, and the marriage between Cuba Sr. and Shirley grew increasingly strained. In 1974, when Cuba Jr. was just 6 years old, his father abandoned the family, leaving Shirley to raise 4 children alone in Los Angeles. The abandonment was sudden and devastating. One day their father was there, the next he was gone, leaving confusion, hurt, and significant financial hardship. Shirley, suddenly a single mother of 4 in an expensive city, struggled to provide stability while dealing with her own pain and anger at her husband's desertion. This abandonment would profoundly shape Cuba Jr.'s understanding of masculinity, fatherhood, and responsibility. The pain of his father's absence, the witnessing of his mother's struggle, and the feeling of having been discarded created wounds that would influence Cuba's choices and behavior throughout his life. In later years, Cuba has spoken about the abandonment with a mixture of understanding and lingering hurt, recognizing his father's own struggles while never quite forgiving the desertion. To support the family, Shirley worked multiple jobs, often leaving the children to fend for themselves. Cuba Jr., as one of the older children, took on responsibilities beyond his years, looking after younger siblings, helping with household tasks, essentially becoming a surrogate father figure despite being a child himself. This premature responsibility, while building resilience and capability, also robbed Cuba of normal childhood and created patterns of behavior that would later prove problematic. Growing up in Los Angeles during the 1970s and early 1980s without strong parental supervision, Cuba Jr. could easily have fallen into the street life that claimed so many young men in his neighborhood. The temptations were everywhere: gangs, drugs, crime offering both belonging and income that legitimate paths seemed unable to provide. Several of Cuba's childhood friends would end up dead or incarcerated, their potential consumed by street violence and the drug trade. What saved Cuba was discovering breakdancing and hip-hop culture. As a teenager, he became involved in the burgeoning breakdancing scene, developing skills and finding a positive outlet for energy and creativity. He performed on street corners and at parties, part of a crew competing against other dancers, finding in the discipline and artistry of dance something that channeled his abilities constructively. Cuba attended 4 different high schools: Tustin High School, Apple Valley High School, and John F. Kennedy High School before graduating from Fairfax High School. This educational instability reflected both family financial pressures that required moves and perhaps also Cuba's own difficulties in settling and focusing. However, he was involved in theater programs at his various schools, discovering that he had natural talent for performance and finding in acting another positive outlet. His first professional work came through small roles in television shows in the mid-1980s, appearances on Hill Street Blues, MacGyver, and various other programs. These roles were typically 1 or 2 scenes, often playing gang members or other minor characters, but they provided income and experience. Cuba was learning the technical aspects of screen acting, hitting marks, dealing with cameras, taking direction, maintaining consistency across multiple takes. In 1988, Cuba had a small but memorable role in Coming to America, Eddie Murphy's comedy about an African prince searching for love in Queens, New York. Cuba played a young man getting his hair cut in a barber shop. A brief scene, but one that showcased his natural charisma and comic timing. More significantly, he appeared in John Singleton's groundbreaking Boys and the Hood, 1991, playing Tree Styles, a young man trying to navigate life in South Central Los Angeles while avoiding the violence and dysfunction surrounding him. Boys in the Hood was a cultural phenomenon, bringing attention to conditions in inner-city Black communities and launching several careers, including Cuba's. His performance as Trey was earnest and affecting, capturing the vulnerability and determination of a young man trying to make good choices despite environmental pressures constantly pulling him toward destruction. Critics praised the film and Cuba's work, and suddenly, at age 23, Cuba Gooding Jr. was recognized as a talented young actor with significant potential. Following Boys and the Hood, Cuba appeared in a series of films throughout the early 1990s that built his resume and reputation. A Few Good Men, 1992, placed him in an ensemble with Tom Cruise, Jack Nicholson, and Demi Moore, playing a Marine accused of murder in a high-profile military case. While his role was supporting, the film's commercial success and prestige raised Cuba's profile. He appeared in Judgment Night, 1993, Lightning Jack, 1994, and Outbreak, 1995, each role expanding his range and demonstrating his versatility. However, it was his role in Jerry Maguire, 1996, that would transform Cuba's career and life forever. Cast as Rod Tidwell, a talented but undervalued NFL wide receiver desperate for recognition and a better contract, Cuba created a character that was both comic and deeply human. Rod's famous line, "Show me the money," repeated in the film's most iconic scene, became a cultural catchphrase, but Cuba's performance went far beyond that single moment. He showed Rod's bravado masking insecurity, his love for his family, his hunger for respect, and his ultimate loyalty to the sports agent played by Tom Cruise. The performance was big, energetic, and totally committed, balancing comedy and genuine emotion in ways that made Rod Tidwell one of the most memorable supporting characters of the 1990s. The industry response was overwhelming. Cuba won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, beating out strong competition and becoming one of the few Black actors to win in that category. His acceptance speech was ebullient and emotional, thanking everyone involved, expressing joy and disbelief, embodying the excitement of a dream realized. The Oscar placed Cuba in rarefied company, validating years of work and opening doors to opportunities that had previously been closed. However, the Oscar would prove to be both Cuba's greatest achievement and, in some ways, the beginning of significant professional difficulties. The expectation was that Oscar-winning actors would ascend to bigger roles, better scripts, increased compensation, and elevated status. For Cuba, the trajectory was far more complicated. In the years immediately following his Oscar win, Cuba Gooding Jr. made a series of career choices that baffled industry observers and fans. Rather than leveraging his Oscar into prestige projects with quality directors, Cuba appeared in a string of forgettable comedies and mediocre films that squandered the goodwill and momentum his award should have generated. What Dreams May Come, 1998, was a visually ambitious but narratively muddled film where Cuba played a supporting role. Instinct, 1999, paired him with Anthony Hopkins in a drama that received poor reviews. Most damagingly, Boat Trip, 2002, was a critically reviled comedy about two straight men accidentally booking a gay cruise. A premise and execution that was offensive to multiple communities and represented a career nadir. Other films from this period: Snow Dogs, 2002, Radio, 2003, Norbit, 2007, ranged from mediocre to terrible. Critics and audiences wondered what had happened to the actor whose performance in Jerry Maguire had shown such promise. The roles seemed chosen without regard for quality or career building, as if Cuba was simply taking whatever offered the biggest paycheck, regardless of material quality or long-term implications. Several factors likely contributed to these poor choices: financial pressure to maintain a certain lifestyle, agents who prioritized commissions over client career development, Cuba's own difficulty discerning quality material, and perhaps also a fundamental insecurity that made turning down work, even bad work, feel impossible. For someone who had grown up with financial instability and witnessed his father's career decline, the temptation to grab every paycheck might have overridden longer-term strategic thinking. The result was a dramatic career decline. By the mid-2000s, Cuba Gooding Jr. had become something of a punchline, the Oscar winner who had completely wasted his opportunity, appearing in direct-to-video films and projects that serious actors avoided. The distance between Oscar triumph and career reality became almost tragic, a cautionary tale about how quickly success can evaporate through poor decision-making. Industry professionals began avoiding Cuba, seeing him as someone who brought neither box office value nor prestige. The Oscar that should have been a launchpad instead became an albatross, making the contrast between past achievement and current reality even starker. For Cuba, this professional decline occurred alongside personal challenges that would eventually explode into public scandal. Cuba Gooding Jr. married his high school sweetheart Sarah Kapfer in 1994. 2 years before his Oscar win. The couple had known each other since they were teenagers, and their relationship seemed to offer stability and connection to Cuba's pre-fame life. They would have 3 children together, Spencer, Mason, and Piper, and for many years Cuba publicly presented as a dedicated family man. However, the reality behind the public facade was increasingly troubled. The demands of Cuba's career, travel, filming schedules, promotional obligations meant extended absences from home. The career disappointments and financial pressures created stress that affected the marriage. And Cuba's own behavior, which would later become subject of serious allegations, created dynamics that made the relationship increasingly unsustainable. Friends and colleagues from this period describe Cuba as someone whose personality changed dramatically with success and then struggled as that success faded. The gregarious, grateful actor of the Jerry Maguire era gave way to someone increasingly difficult, prone to outbursts, drinking heavily, and behaving inappropriately in professional settings. Whether these behavioral changes reflected pre-existing issues that success had masked, or whether fame and subsequent disappointment created new problems, is unclear. Sarah Kapfer filed for separation in 2014 after 20 years of marriage. Citing irreconcilable differences. The couple's divorce proceedings were lengthy and contentious, not finalizing until 2017. The breakdown of his marriage represented both personal failure, the ending of a relationship that had lasted through his ascent and decline, and public acknowledgement that the family man image Cuba had cultivated was at best incomplete. During and after his separation from Sarah, Cuba's behavior became increasingly concerning. Reports of erratic conduct at public events, heavy drinking, and inappropriate interactions with women began surfacing with disturbing frequency. What had perhaps been occasional incidents became a pattern that suggested deeper problems with impulse control, respect for boundaries, and judgment. In June 2019, Cuba Gooding Jr. was arrested and charged with forcible touching after a woman accused him of groping her at a New York City nightclub. The allegation was serious, non-consensual touching of a woman's breast, and marked the beginning of a legal nightmare that would dominate Cuba's life for years. Cuba pleaded not guilty, and his attorney argued that the contact was accidental or misinterpreted. However, following Cuba's arrest, more than 30 additional women came forward with allegations of sexual misconduct spanning years and occurring in various cities. These allegations painted a disturbing pattern of behavior: unwanted touching, groping, inappropriate comments, and boundary violations occurring at clubs, restaurants, hotels, and other public spaces. The sheer number of allegations and their consistency across time and geography made Cuba's defense increasingly difficult. Multiple women who didn't know each other described similar experiences with Cuba: inappropriate touching, resistance to boundaries, sense of entitlement to women's bodies. The accusations suggested not isolated incidents, but rather a pattern of behavior extending over years. In 2020, Cuba was charged with an additional count of forcible touching involving a different woman. The legal proceedings were complex, involving multiple jurisdictions, victims, and years of legal maneuvering. Throughout this period, Cuba continued to deny wrongdoing, though his public image was irreparably damaged. In April 2022, Cuba pleaded guilty to one count of forcible touching as part of a plea deal that allowed him to avoid jail time if he completed 6 months of alcohol treatment and remained out of legal trouble for a year. The plea deal was controversial. Some saw it as appropriate given the circumstances. Others felt it was too lenient and sent the wrong message about accountability for sexual misconduct. For Cuba, the legal resolution, while avoiding incarceration, represented profound personal and professional destruction. His reputation was shattered, employment opportunities evaporated, and public perception shifted from troubled former star to serial sexual predator. The contrast with his Oscar-winning moment, the joy, gratitude, and unlimited seeming potential, could not have been starker or more painful. By the early 2000s, Cuba Gooding Jr.'s career was essentially over. The sexual misconduct allegations and legal troubles made him unemployable in mainstream entertainment. Projects that had been in development were canceled, roles were recast, and Cuba found himself essentially blacklisted. The few work opportunities that came his way were in low-budget productions willing to overlook his legal troubles for financial reasons. Financially, Cuba faced significant challenges. Legal fees from years of defending against multiple allegations and criminal charges consumed substantial resources. His divorce from Sarah Kapfer included financial settlements, and the loss of acting income meant Cuba's financial situation, while perhaps not dire given earlier earnings, was far from secure. More importantly, Cuba faced a personal and moral reckoning. The allegations from over 30 women demanded confronting his behavior and its impact. While Cuba's public statements maintained innocence or minimization, friends report that privately he struggled with guilt, shame, and recognition that his actions had caused harm. Whether this private acknowledgement represents genuine accountability or simply distress at consequences remains debatable. It was against this backdrop of personal, professional, and legal crisis that Cuba Gooding Jr. began experiencing symptoms that would lead to his lymphoma diagnosis. The combination of extreme stress, heavy drinking over many years, and the general toll of his lifestyle likely contributed to compromised health that made serious illness more probable. The lymphoma diagnosis, which Cuba has now publicly revealed, represents another devastating blow to someone whose life has been characterized by such dramatic rises and falls. Lymphoma, cancer of the lymphatic system, comes in many forms with varying prognoses. That Cuba began chemotherapy in mid-December and faces a 3-month initial treatment course suggests a treatment plan that doctors believe can achieve remission or cure, though the specific type and stage of his lymphoma haven't been publicly disclosed. Cuba's description of his treatment experience, the frequent hospitalizations, the exhaustion, the hair loss, the port placed under his skin, reflects the brutal reality of chemotherapy. The drugs used to kill rapidly dividing cancer cells don't discriminate perfectly, affecting hair follicles, digestive tract lining, and bone marrow along with cancer cells. The result is profound physical and psychological challenge that tests patients' endurance and will. For Cuba, the hair loss carries particular significance. As a public figure whose appearance has been part of his professional currency, the visible marker of illness that hair loss represents is difficult to accept. His use of cold caps during treatment, a painful process that reduces blood flow to the scalp and thereby limits chemotherapy's impact on hair follicles, demonstrates his investment in maintaining appearance even at significant discomfort. Cuba's assertion that he's responding very well to treatment and not going to die reflects both medical reality, if doctors are indeed seeing positive response to chemotherapy, and psychological strategy. Maintaining optimism and determination during cancer treatment can influence outcomes through concrete mechanisms like treatment adherence, immune function, and overall quality of life during treatment. However, Cuba's optimistic public statements may not fully capture the reality of his situation. Cancer treatment is unpredictable. An initial positive response doesn't guarantee long-term cure. Moreover, the stress of ongoing legal troubles, career destruction, and personal difficulties could potentially affect immune function and recovery in ways that complicate treatment outcomes. Cuba's decision to publicly reveal his cancer diagnosis, after initially keeping it secret, reflects a shift in his approach to public life. For someone who has spent years defending against allegations, minimizing problems, and maintaining a facade of confidence despite mounting difficulties, the cancer diagnosis perhaps represented a challenge that couldn't be hidden or denied, and perhaps shouldn't be. The relief Cuba describes in finally being honest about his condition suggests that maintaining secrecy was psychologically burdensome. Cancer diagnosis is isolating, and the need to hide illness compounds that isolation. By revealing his diagnosis, Cuba allowed himself to receive support, to acknowledge vulnerability, and to stop expending energy on maintaining false appearances. His statement that he's living much more peacefully with this disease and has completely accepted it suggests psychological work around acceptance that extends beyond cancer to encompass his broader life situation. Cancer has a way of forcing confrontation with reality, about mortality, about what matters, about the difference between controllable and uncontrollable circumstances. For Cuba, cancer may have prompted broader reckoning with his choices, behavior, and the wreckage of his career and reputation. The decision to appear on talk shows and social media discussing his treatment represents a choice to use his platform, diminished though it may be, to demystify cancer treatment and perhaps to rehabilitate his image by showing vulnerability and humanity. This strategic element doesn't negate the genuine difficulty of his situation, but acknowledges that public figures manage their images even during serious illness. Cuba Gooding Jr.'s cancer diagnosis raises complicated questions about redemption, accountability, and how society should respond to fallen public figures facing serious illness. On one hand, Cuba is a human being dealing with potentially life-threatening disease, deserving of compassion and support during this difficult time. On the other hand, he's someone who has been credibly accused by over 30 women of sexual misconduct and who pleaded guilty to forcible touching, actions that caused real harm to real people. The question becomes, can someone be both perpetrator and victim? Someone who deserves both accountability for harm caused and compassion for suffering experienced? The answer is yes, though holding both truths simultaneously is uncomfortable. Cuba's cancer doesn't erase or excuse his behavior toward women. Simultaneously, his past actions don't mean he's undeserving of basic human compassion during serious illness. For the women Cuba harmed, his illness likely produces complicated responses. Some may feel satisfaction that someone who violated their boundaries is now suffering. Others may feel genuine sympathy despite past harm. Still others may feel nothing, their processing of what Cuba did to them being entirely separate from his current health crisis. All these responses are valid and understandable. For society more broadly, Cuba's situation raises questions about whether there's a path to redemption for people who have caused harm, and if so, what that path looks like. Does sincere accountability, changed behavior, and efforts to make amends create possibility for forgiveness and reintegration? Or are some actions so harmful that redemption becomes impossible regardless of subsequent circumstances? These questions don't have simple answers, but Cuba's cancer creates an opportunity for nuanced conversation about accountability, redemption, and how we respond to fallen public figures facing circumstances that evoke our compassion, even as their past actions evoke our condemnation. As Cuba Gooding Jr. continues his chemotherapy treatment, his immediate future remains focused on achieving remission or cure of his lymphoma. His doctor's apparent optimism about his response to treatment offers hope that the cancer can be successfully controlled or eliminated. However, cancer treatment is unpredictable, and much depends on factors impossible to determine from public information. The specific type and stage of lymphoma, Cuba's overall health, how completely treatment eliminates cancer cells. If treatment is successful and Cuba achieves remission, he faces the question of what comes next, professionally and personally. His career, already destroyed by sexual misconduct allegations and guilty plea, will not simply resume. The entertainment industry that once celebrated him has moved on, and Cuba's age, 57, reputation, and years away from quality work make any significant career resurrection unlikely. Personally, Cuba faces continued work around accountability, behavior change, and perhaps seeking to make amends where possible for harm caused. His children, now adults, have witnessed their father's fall from grace and must navigate their own relationships with both his achievements and his failures. Whether Cuba can find purpose and meaning beyond the career that once defined him remains an open question. The legal requirements from his 2022 plea deal, including alcohol treatment and staying out of legal trouble, provide structure and accountability that may support positive change. Whether Cuba internalizes the lessons of his treatment and genuinely changes his approach to women and boundaries, or whether he simply completes requirements to avoid further legal consequences, will become apparent over time. Cuba Gooding Jr.'s life story is ultimately one of extraordinary potential partially fulfilled and then squandered through poor choices, harmful behavior, and apparent inability to manage success or cope constructively with disappointment. From the bright promise of his Oscar win to the depths of sexual misconduct allegations and now serious illness, Cuba's journey encompasses the full range of human possibility for both achievement and failure. His story also reveals the ways that childhood trauma, in Cuba's case, his father's abandonment, can create wounds that influence behavior decades later in ways that cause harm to others. This understanding doesn't excuse Cuba's actions toward women, but provides context for how someone capable of genuine warmth and talent could also behave so harmfully. Hurt people, as the saying goes, and Cuba's pattern of violating women's boundaries likely connected to his own deep wounds around respect, value, and boundaries. And the cancer diagnosis adds another chapter to this complicated story, one that evokes compassion while not erasing accountability for past harm. Cuba's battle with lymphoma, his determination to survive and maintain optimism, his eventual openness about his condition, all demonstrate resilience and humanity that have always coexisted alongside his harmful behaviors. Cuba Gooding Jr.'s story remains unfinished. He continues cancer treatment with doctors reporting positive response. He continues living with the consequences of his actions toward women. He continues navigating a world where his past achievements feel increasingly distant and irrelevant compared to his more recent failures and harm. Whether Cuba's remaining chapters involve redemption, accountability, positive contribution, or simply quiet survival remains to be seen. His cancer fight, while genuinely difficult and demanding of courage, doesn't constitute redemption for past harm. That would require far more than surviving illness. True redemption would involve sustained acknowledgement of harm caused, visible behavior change, and efforts to contribute positively to addressing the systems and attitudes that enable sexual misconduct. What Cuba's story does demonstrate is the complicated, messy reality of human life, that people can be both talented and harmful, can achieve great things and cause great pain, can deserve both accountability and compassion. The desire to reduce people to simple narratives of hero or villain, to divide the world into good people and bad people, doesn't withstand contact with the complicated reality that Cuba Gooding Jr. represents, someone capable of genuine achievement and terrible harm, now facing his greatest challenge with the same resilience that once led to Oscar glory, but couldn't prevent his fall from grace. "Show me the money," once echoed as a celebration of success and recognition. Now, as Cuba Gooding Jr. fights for his life while living with consequences of his actions, the phrase feels like a distant echo from a different life. A reminder both of what was achieved and what was lost, of potential fulfilled and squandered, of the complicated, unfinished story of a man whose greatest battles may not be the ones he expected, but remain the ones he must face with whatever courage and honesty he can muster.